The hospital room was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside the window, the golden hue of the late afternoon sun spilled across the floor, warming the otherwise sterile space. Emily sat in a chair beside the window, her hospital gown slightly wrinkled, a knitted blanket draped over her legs. Her once vibrant auburn hair had thinned, her frame fragile, but her eyes, those bright hazel eyes, still held a sparkle, a stubborn light that refused to go out. She watched the children playing in the park across the street, their laughter faintly audible through the closed window. They ran with abandon, their energy boundless, their joy pure. She smiled softly, almost wistfully, as if remembering something just out of reach. Then came the sound of footsteps, light but familiar. Daniel stepped in, carrying a tiny cupcake in one hand, a single candle already flickering. His other hand held a bouquet of fresh daisies, her favorite. He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. This was the third birthday they'd spent in the hospital, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the way Emily looked at the world outside the window, as if memorizing it. He walked over to her and knelt down, placing the cupcake on the small table beside her. "Happy birthday, Em," he said gently, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She looked at him, and for a moment, all the strength she had mustered to smile seemed to slip away. Her eyes welled with tears, not the kind that fall, but the kind that stay thick with weight. With words unspoken, she reached for his hand, her touch still warm, still full of love. He held her fingers tightly, afraid to let go. She studied his face for a second, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the way his brows knit together when he was worried. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost blended with the hum of the machines around them, she whispered, "This is my last birthday." Daniel's heart clenched. The world seemed to tilt, the breath caught in his throat. He looked at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, that she was being dramatic. But she didn't. Her eyes just held his, calm and certain, as if she'd already made peace with it. He wanted to scream. He wanted to beg the universe to give her more time, to trade places, to do anything but accept those 5 words. But he didn't. Instead, he swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded slowly, tears blurring his vision. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. They didn't speak for a while after that. There was no need. The silence was filled with all the things they couldn't say, with the dreams they had shared, the future they had planned, the memories they had already made. It was filled with love, with fear, with the aching realization that time was no longer on their side. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows in the room. The candle on the cupcake flickered once, then again, struggling to stay lit. Emily reached for it, and with a shaky breath, closed her eyes and made a wish. Daniel watched her, wondering what someone wishes for when they know they're running out of tomorrows. She opened her eyes and blew out the candle. "I wished," she said softly, "that tonight, just for a little while, I can feel normal again, that I can forget the machines, the medicine, the fear." Daniel leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Then that's exactly what we'll do," he whispered. "We'll make this birthday unforgettable." And in that moment, he wasn't thinking about the hospital, or the illness, or even the heartbreak ahead. He was thinking only of her, how to fill whatever time they had left with light, with laughter, with love so big that not even death could erase it. Daniel stepped out of the room and let the door close softly behind him. The moment the latch clicked, the weight of Emily's words crashed down on him like a tidal wave. "This is my last birthday." The sentence played on repeat in his mind, each repetition cutting deeper, sharper, more unbearable. He pressed, his back against the sterile white wall of the hospital corridor, his knees slightly buckling as the fluorescent lights above hummed like a cruel soundtrack to his unraveling thoughts. Nurses walked past. A patient in a wheelchair was pushed slowly toward the elevator, but to Daniel, the world had gone still. He was trapped in the gravity of those words, 5 syllables that shattered everything they had dreamed about. His eyes burned, but he refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. His hands trembled slightly as he ran one through his hair, gripping the back of his neck like it might anchor him to reality. He walked toward the vending machine, not to buy anything, but because he needed something solid to focus on. Anything. Staring at the rows of snacks behind the glass. He saw nothing, just a blur of reds and blues, nothing that mattered. His reflection stared back at him, a man suddenly too small to hold the weight of what he'd just heard. Emily's cancer was back, not the kind that offers hope in the form of treatment plans or percentages. This one had a name like a verdict, terminal. She hadn't told anyone until today, not even him. And now, on what should have been a celebration, she gave him a goodbye dressed as a birthday wish. Asterisk his jaw tightened, fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to scream at the ceiling, punch the machine, demand more time, but none of that would change the truth. She was dying. The woman he loved more than life itself was quietly counting down her final days. Asterisk, and yet, beneath the devastation, something stirred in him. A defiant warmth. A purpose. If this really was her last birthday, then he wouldn't let it pass like any other. It wouldn't be spent under cold lights and bland hospital walls, forgotten. In the shadows of pain. Asterisk, he took a deep breath, straightened up, and whispered to himself, if this is her last birthday, it won't feel like the last. Asterisk, there was still time to fill this day with light, with music, with memories, with magic. She deserved to feel everything she had once brought into his life, joy, wonder, and the feeling that even in the darkest places, love could bloom. As the hospital intercom buzzed faintly overhead, Daniel's face hardened, not in anger, but in resolve. He didn't know how yet, but he would turn this day around. For her, for everything she had ever given him, he would make sure her last birthday wouldn't be about endings, but about everything that made life worth living. Asterisk, the hospital rooftop had never seen a night like this. The sterile gray surface had been transformed into something magical, a hidden world suspended between the stars, and the soft hum of the city below. Fairy lights twinkled above like tiny galaxies, draped between 4 poles and oxygen tanks disguised with ribbons. Blankets were spread out like picnic mats, cushions borrowed from waiting rooms were scattered around. It was far from perfect, but somehow, it was beautiful. Asterisk, Daniel stood at the edge, watching as the final touches came together. Nurses from Emily's floor carried trays of cupcakes. A young man from the cancer support group helped string up the last strand of lights, grinning nervously as he tied the knot. A borrowed projector sat atop a rolling cart, casting flickers of color onto a white bedsheet taped to the wall. Asterisk. Every detail was a piece of Emily's world, her favorite things, woven into one final night of magic. A nurse wheeled out the small speaker, already softly playing a familiar tune, and in the corner, a violinist, an old patient who had recovered, tightened his bow, preparing to play the lullaby Emily's mother used to hum to her when she couldn't sleep. Then came the moment. Daniel rushed back downstairs to her room. He didn't tell her much, just smiled with wide eyes and said, "There's something I want to show you." Asterisk. Emily was bundled in a shawl, cheeks pale but glowing with curiosity. As they reached the rooftop elevator, her eyes widened at the soft notes of the violin drifting down the shaft, and when the doors opened, she gasped. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. The stars both sparkled, the fairy lights shimmered, and the people gathered turned to her with warm, quiet smiles. Asterisk. Her eyes darted around, recognizing friends she hadn't seen in years. The nurse who always smuggled her extra pudding, even Mr. Alvarez, the retired janitor who'd taught her how to play cards. But what took her breath away were the details. Asterisk. The white sheet fluttering slightly in the breeze was now glowing with the opening credits of her favorite movie. As the music played, second surprise followed, a tablet handed to her by a nurse. On the screen, her grandmother's smiling face appeared from thousands of miles away in Italy. Asterisk. Buon compleanno, amor mio, the woman said through tears. I'm with you, always. Asterisk. Emily began to cry softly, overwhelmed but smiling through the pain. Asterisk. Then, as she was wheeled further into the heart of it all, Daniel knelt beside her and handed her a small envelope. Her name was handwritten on it, in looping script she instantly recognized. She stared at it in disbelief. Asterisk. Is this? Asterisk. He nodded. A friend of a friend knew someone. I just asked for a note. But he sent this. Asterisk. Inside was a letter from her favorite author, handwritten, personal, filled with gratitude for how Emily's story, shared anonymously through a fan forum, had touched his own. The words were full of encouragement, wonder, and love for a girl he'd never met, but somehow understood. Asterisk. Emily clutched the letter to her chest and looked up at Daniel, who now sat beside her on the blanket, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. Asterisk. I can't believe this, she whispered. It's like everything I ever wanted but never dared to ask for. Asterisk. Daniel looked into her eyes and smiled. You once said all you wanted was to feel alive, just for a night. Asterisk. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the movie flicker in the dark, feeling the violinist's music swirl around her, listening to the quiet laughter and gentle chatter of people who showed up just for her. Asterisk, and for that one night, the pain didn't matter. The hospital didn't exist. Time didn't feel like it was slipping away. She felt alive, and that was the miracle. Asterisk, the stars were high now, scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. The rooftop had quieted, most guests having slipped away with hugs and silent nods, leaving behind the soft hum of the projector and the gentle melody of the wind. Emily sat bundled in a blanket, her face flushed from joy and exhaustion, her hands still clutching the letter from her favorite author. Her breathing was slower now, but peaceful, as though the weight she had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. Asterisk, Daniel returned to her side, his steps slow and careful, and then knelt in front of her, holding a small velvet box. It looked like a jewelry case, simple and elegant, and for a moment, Emily smiled playfully. Asterisk, Daniel, she whispered with a mock scold, if you're about to propose on a hospital rooftop. Asterisk, he chuckled softly, shaking his head. No rings tonight, just a different kind of gift. Asterisk, he opened the box, revealing not a necklace or a pair of earrings, but a tiny USB drive. Emily blinked, confused, glancing up at him with a tilted head. Asterisk, trust me, he said, gently placing it in her hand. Asterisk, he took out his tablet, already waiting on the home screen, and inserted the drive. A moment later, a video began to play. Asterisk, it opened with a young woman standing in a bookstore. She looked straight into the camera and smiled nervously. Asterisk, hi. Emily, you probably don't remember me, but 2 years ago, you stayed late after your shift just to talk to me when I was crying in the corner aisle. You told me that life wasn't over, even when it felt like it was. I wanted you to know. Because of you, I didn't give up. I'm getting married this fall, thank you. The screen cut to another Pfizer middle-aged man with weathered eyes. She probably won't tell you this, he said, but Emily paid half the cost of my daughter's surgery last year. I didn't even know her, we just posted online. She never asked for anything back. We never got to thank her, so thank you. From a father who got more time with his little girl because of you. Asterisk, Emily's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes already brimming with tears. She looked at Daniel in disbelief, but he simply reached over and held her other hand, squeezing gently. Asterisk, the video kept going. A college student saying Emily's mentorship helped her get a scholarship. A woman in her 60s smiling through tears. Because of Emily, I reconciled with my father after 10 years of silence. Asterisk, even a quiet voice from a homeless shelter staff member. She came by once a month, always left something behind. Food, socks, notes. We called her the girl with the lantern smile. Asterisk, Emily couldn't breathe. Or maybe she could, truly. For the first time, asterisk, tears fell freely. Not from sadness, but from a kind of awe. A kind of overwhelming understanding that she had never dared to believe she mattered. Deeply, quietly, lastingly. Asterisk, she looked at Daniel, her lips trembling. I didn't know they remembered me. Asterisk, he leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. Of course they did. You changed people's lives. You left light everywhere you went. Asterisk, her sobs were silent now, her chest rising and falling with quiet emotion, her heart fuller than it had ever been. Asterisk, she had thought her story was ending, but in truth, it had already become part of so many others, living, breathing, growing, a gift beyond time. Asterisk, the morning light crept gently over the horizon, brushing soft gold across the hospital garden. Dew sparkled on the petals of blooming flowers, and the air was crisp and still, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. Emily sat on a wooden bench near the center of the garden, wrapped in a thick shawl, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Her face was pale but peaceful, and her eyes, though tired, reflected the soft fire of a soul deeply moved. Asterisk, beside her sat Daniel, his arm resting gently around her shoulders, pulling her close against the chill. They had barely slept. The night had been too full of tears, laughter, stories, and miracles for either of them to want to close their eyes. Asterisk, now. They watched the sun rise together, in silence, letting the warmth of a new day soak into their skin. Asterisk, after a while, Emily broke the silence with a whisper that barely rose above the birdsong. Asterisk, that felt like a lifetime in one night. Asterisk, her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the soft vulnerability of someone who had seen the end and found, instead, a new beginning. Asterisk, Daniel turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His voice was calm, steady, full of love. Asterisk, because you gave lifetimes to others, last night, they just gave a little bit of it back. Asterisk, she smiled, eyes glistening once more, not from sadness this time, but from a deep, full-hearted gratitude. The kind that settles into your bones and never leaves. The garden slowly came to life around them. A nurse passed by in the distance, quietly nodding with a knowing smile. Birds flew overhead, gliding in graceful patterns across the soft blue sky. Emily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, closing her eyes for just a moment. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid, not of tomorrow, not of goodbye, not of what came next. Because in one night, just one unforgettable night, she had been reminded that her life had meaning, her love had power, and her kindness had left footprints that would never fade. She didn't feel like she was fading anymore. She felt like she was flying.